So next up, Scott, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen while I read your introduction. I'm also very excited about this presentation, but Scott, I'm going to apologize in advance. I used TikTok to help me with the pronunciation, and I am sure that I got it wrong. But next up, we have Scott Renton of the University of Edinburgh, who is presenting Tobar on Dualchais and the ArchivesSpace API. Tobar on Dualchais is one of the most important Scottish cultural heritage collections, gathering together audio recordings of songs, stories, poems, radio shows, and beyond in English, Scots, and Gaelic. Recently, the University of Edinburgh Library took on the job of providing data to a new third-party front end for TAD and opted to use the trusted and reliable ArchivesSpace infrastructure to store this. Interactions between the website and ArchivesSpace take place through the API. Scott will demonstrate the workflows they've undertaken to make this possible, including making audio recordings playable on the site and allowing multilingual aspects of the content. Scott?
Thanks very much, and your pronunciation was certainly no worse than mine. I can say already. Thanks for that. Right. So I'm Scott Renton, systems architect at the Digital Library at the University of Edinburgh, and I'd like to talk to you about an ArchivesSpace use case that we feel is worthy of mentioning. And in fact, forgive us because we've been meaning to do so for some time and just haven't got round to it. I'll explain to you what it is, what it does, and how we went about putting it together. So the collection in question is called Tobar and Dualchais. For those of you that can speak Scottish Gaelic, forgive my pronunciation. Those of you that don't, then we can try it in the Scots tongue, which is not much easier. There it's called Kista Riches. And in English, what that means is basically a deep well of wonderful content from which we wish to draw and drink our fill. So what's in this deep well? Well, to quote the site itself, Tobar and Dualchais, Kista Riches, is dedicated to the presentation and promotion of audio recordings of Scotland's cultural heritage through its website and subsidiary projects. It exists to make these recordings widely accessible and to create a broader and deeper understanding of its content, inspiring new research and creative work, educational opportunities and community engagement. So basically, what we're talking about is what has been described as the world's most important resource for audio recordings of Scottish cultural heritage from the 1930s onwards. The tracks therein might be songs or stories, poetry, concert recordings, interviews. You'll find performances from the prestigious singing competition, the Royal National Mod, radio shows such as Jill and Jay, the Butterfly, or Programme Honich, songs from Jeannie Robertson, the Corries, the McCalmans, and interviews with traditionalists like Catherine Dix and Willie Matheson. You'll find some small mention of our national treasure Billy Connolly, and you'll find plenty of Robert Burns, inevitably. And all of this is there with the goal of preserving as much recorded content as possible for future generations. It's described in English, Scottish Gaelic and the Scots languages, and it's the work of some very revered collectors such as Hamish Henderson, one of the foremost catalysts of the folk revival in Scotland, the ethnographer Callum Ian MacLean, and the historian John Lorne Campbell. And where does the content come from? The vast majority is from the University of Edinburgh's School of Scottish Studies archives, and there's many a reel-to-reel tape to be found in the AV suite up there. However, there is content from the BBC's Radio Nangale and Historic Environment Scotland's Canna collection, and as a result, it's administered by Tobar and Dualchais, a separate body located at the University of the Highlands and Islands, which ensures that all the rights and licences and usage permissions are adhered to across the full body of work. And Tobar and Dualchais staff and steering group are run by people heavily involved and invested in the arts. Indeed, its director of development is Donnie Munro, the former lead singer of Scottish Gaelic rock group Runrig, who you may have come across. Tobar and Dualchais isn't just about offering the collection to the public as a website. As you'll see by visiting tobaranddualchais.co.uk, there's a lot of activity which goes on around the archive. The projects tab will show you the short courses delivered at Salmore Ostig on the Isle of Skye around writing and creative pursuits with the content and so on. There's the Speak Gaelic project, which is there to encourage people to learn the language. And there's an artist in residence currently, Ishmael Hendry. You'll also find tabs with school support and a blog. So anyway, that's what Tobar and Dualchais is. Let's move on to the project itself. So the first iteration of the website was built by the Applications Directorate at the University of Edinburgh in 2010. Its back end, the CAP system, is a bit older, and the first digital cataloguing was done from about 2007. Its architecture hit end of life, and the rescue site with a guaranteed short stay was built by the Edinburgh Directorate at the University in around 2016, live in 2018. And around this time, the digital library of which I am a part started to get involved because we knew that Heritage Collections, which is affiliated to the library, were taking stewardship of the Scottish Studies Archive. So it became our responsibility to move the resource on for the foreseeable future. ArchivesSpace was agreed to be the home of the data, but we did not agree to build the front end. A third-party web development company called Primate, based in Edinburgh, took on that part of the job with the task of interfacing to ArchivesSpace. The project team was pulled together from many disparate areas, and indeed my colleague Chris Wright, officially the Scots cataloguer of Tobar, but at the time of the project senior user of the site, is on the call today and is probably cringing at all of my inaccuracies as I go through this. So why ArchivesSpace? Well, we had a number of architectural conversations to come up with the right approach. We had looked at a sort of standalone web app, something else to support, and something that maybe would be a little bit flimsier. So those sorts of things were considered, but ultimately we came down on the thing that we were most comfortable with for stewardship of the data. And it puts the robust processes of care and maintenance that we need around the content. And we understand it well. Edinburgh were, I think, the first UK institution to adopt the tool in 2014, and we quickly became consortium members, and it's now the home of our prestigious archives, the likes of which are listed here. So we've got the Carmichael Watson folklore notebooks, which is accredited and UNESCO protected. We've got the Charles Lyell geology scientific notebooks. He was a great idol of Charles Darwin. We've got the town planner Patrick Geddes' work, who's was all about making the lives of people in Edinburgh better. Burke and Hare, the grave robbers and murderers. We've got Lady Grange letters from captivity, the Lothian Health Service, and we've got the genetic stuff featuring Edinburgh's most famous alumnus, Dolly the sheep. And then we do have a lot of experience of building websites which interface to ArchivesSpace data. Using a PHP framework, which we call Skylight, we've been interfacing to the ArchivesSpace Solar Index since about 2015, I think, building sort of smaller websites which allow us to look at a resource in more detail. So for things like the Regional Ethnology of Scotland project, the LHSA case notes, and once again, the work of Dolly the sheep. So a lot of challenges did need to be addressed in the project beyond simply migrating the data. I remember raising this in early 2020 and speaking to Christine about them over what was then the novel experience of a Zoom call. I didn't realise that all communication for the rest of the year would be conducted that way. So COVID compounded what were already abstruse technical challenges, but we did, like everyone else, get used to that way of working. Probably the most challenging aspect of the Tobar and Dualchais site is the dual language bit, the toggle that all previous iterations of the website have had to allow users to see works delivered in Gaelic as well as English. But there's more to it than that. The search would have to be reliable and speedy, like anything that you're using an API for. You need to ensure that the integration is good and fast. And we have issues and challenges around terms of use and things like that, making sure that users can't download the media and that sort of thing. There were challenges for the cataloguers as well. They needed to be able to get data in quickly and efficiently, and ArchivesSpace was a new tool to them, and to catalogue by hand straight into ArchivesSpace in the raw can be quite daunting. And another thing to note is that we have no public user interface on our ArchivesSpace instance here, because the front end is the website is to be that, and we didn't want to compound things with more complications. So the infrastructure itself was quite straightforward. Primate's website over here, Tobar and Dualchais Co UK, would interface to ArchivesSpace using the API and picking up archival objects for the tracks, digital objects for the digitized content, subjects and agents. The actual media can't sit in ArchivesSpace because it doesn't hold media. So that lives in a DSpace repository. We've used DSpace extensively at Edinburgh. And they basically we load into into DSpace using the API, which creates in turn digital objects in ArchivesSpace, and then they get attached to the archival objects themselves. We'd considered putting Tobar and Dualchais into into our main ArchivesSpace as a separate repository, but decided not to do this because subjects and agents work across the whole instance, and to allow Tobar freedom over this content, it was felt that a separate instance would work better. Obviously, that gives us as a team more systems to support, but it's something we know well, and it's just doing the same thing again, so it's not a big overhead. Okay, so the data structure is basically iTunes via ArchivesSpace, if you can still say iTunes in 2024. Archivists analysed the data and came up with a mapping between the old rescue site and ArchivesSpace to take into account all of the detailed fieldwork information that had been captured against each track and tape. Once this was done, the developer worked around the API in PHP to migrate everything in, and the process took about a week to run. And we managed to preserve the IDs from the old system to ensure continuity and successful persistence of old bookmarks, so that's something that worked well. The resultant data structure treated Tobar and Dualchais as one resource. Data providers are stored below that level at subfonds, and then they have tapes the next level down as series. So everything's archival objects below Tobar and Dualchais, basically. That's the only resource fonds. Moving down, tracks are comprise the tapes, they are items, and some of the tracks will have digital objects against them, of course. There are about, to give you some figures, 17,000 tapes in there, comprising 100,000 tracks, 51,000 digital objects. So there are actually about best part of half of the content in ArchivesSpace is metadata only content awaiting digitization. The stuff exists, it just needs to be created in digital form and put up. And here's how it looks on the site. The search bar is there with a range of filters, including genres, whether to show people or tracks, dates, content providers, and so on. And the search bar basically works with the Solr syntax of the ArchivesSpace API. And individual tracks look like this, and they're rendered and supposedly playable on the site. I'll see if I can get this one up. If we're lucky. Ursu swallowed an old brandy bottle.
Ursu swallowed an old brandy bottle. Ach, boeken tidily total. The moo of the bottle it stuck in his throttle. Ach, boeken tidily total.
I thought that was I don't know if that actually came through, but I thought if I was going to put something on, I'd go for something that was 19 seconds long and had one of the best names in the collection. Anyway, we then come to the things that we had to do to make it work. So the dual language aspect was tackled in a number of places. For agents, it's made possible because we're able to store multiple name forms within one agent. So this example, Mary MacDonald, is called Mary Donlach in Gaelic, and both will come through to the site. What actually happens there is that we see on a track whether we're watching in English or in Gaelic. In actual fact, the name here will still come up in the English form, but when we click through, we can see on the Gaelic one that we are working with Mary Donlach, and the other information there. So basically we were able to use multiple name forms to allow dual language on the agents. Bit more challenging on the places, on the subjects. This is a subject list on one archival object. We can see we've got the item location of the village place of the Highlands, and I'm going to stop trying in a second, Gaeltacht. for the Gaelic form. Now, initially, when we'd been looking at this, we thought we would use the scope note to define the language that the item was coming through at, but one of the archivists came up with quite a clever idea of using an external document which defined a key, pair key, basically. So this tells us that we've got these two subject terms, or two subjects made up of terms. 1703 and 1704 is a pair. 1703 and 1704 is a pair here. On the 1703, it's got English, and the 1704, it's got Gaelic. So the website knows when they pull that content through the API, then they're able to show the relevant one in the right place. And subjects do actually show that at track level. So you can see there, item location, village, place, Highlands, and over here, get Huspar, etc. Right, you can tell I'm not a native. Okay, we will then look at media. So this is what an item looks like in the DSpace repository. We did it was the migration into DSpace again took about 4 or 5 days, I think, running all the time using the DSpace API called from a Python script basically, and again generating a record in there which is referenceable, and it stores the file. It's then referenced on the archival object in ArchivesSpace, and then it goes on to that obviously goes on to the archival object, all gets pulled through, and comes through looking quite nice here with the old waveforms there. Generally, we have a one-to-one relationship between archival objects and digital objects. The track is described and the MP4 of that track is attached, and it's all very nice and clean. But we do have continuation tracks where the track in itself is so big that it needs to be broken up. And in this instance, the continuations digital object will actually be sort of forced onto the parent records one, so that all the bits of a track can be consumed on one record in the website. So that's been almost a manual process to begin with, but I think we've got that a bit more automated now. Anyway, that allows everything to be consumed in one place. And then we've got images. Here's Jimmy Macbeth giving a wee performance on stage here. The process would be again to create the record in DSpace, and then write that reference to what was then a biographical note in the agent record. There may be a better way to do that now that we're on to version 3, because when we went live with this, we were in version 2.8, and there wasn't so much capability on the agents as there is now. But yeah, that all works pretty well too. Okay, so a lot of the work that's being done now is around the system is being done using the API and ArchiveSnake to make people's lives a little bit easier. As I said before, cataloging was easier for the Tobar catalogers in the old system, and while we wanted to build a bolt-on app to make data and media entry easier, there wasn't enough resource in our team to do so. So we kind of plodded along developing scripts based on the migration work to allow data and media entry and do some ad hoc data fixes, and that got us through. But then Chris, who was mentioned earlier on, and I'm just being really fawning to him today, he picked up the Python and the ArchiveSnake ball, and he just ran with it. So he's now doing amazing things scripting around the API, and as a result, the development team's role is somewhat reduced, which is, it works for everybody, because we only have a small amount of time that we can really devote to each project that we work on. And so we certainly commit to support ArchivesSpace and the maintenance and getting the upgrades done and all that sort of thing. But Chris has been doing loads of work around the actual data with the API. And while that work has been helping colleagues no end, there are still the less technical ways, and I think the spreadsheet upload is still very much an option for getting stuff in quicker, which we have looked at a little bit. Further development, there's plenty coming up and that can be done on the site. From performance perspective, there are always challenges doing API calls. You're somewhat limited to how fast you can make it go, but we can still look at Solar and my SQL tuning, etc. We've probably given it about as much Java heap spaces as we can before you start getting into diminishing returns. But you know, we're always on hand to try and help. But we do appreciate the nature of how a search works through the API, and bringing it through to another website is complicated, and you can have a lot of API calls to do things, and it does affect performance. So you know that's always something that we're mindful of and looking to improve. And there's certainly for the searching, you know, the relevance is something that you can tune as well, and we would like to get, spend a little more time with Solar, maybe just to see if there are other things we can do to improve the relevance of the search as it comes up. We've talked a little bit about the ease of data and uploading and cataloging, and then we have we're actually moving out of DSpace and moving to a different data source using the Archipelago system, which we're going to have for our main collections at Edinburgh. So that's a tool that's been developed with things like IIIF and stuff like that in mind at the Metropolitan in New York. So we're taking that one quite soon, and I think we'll move that data, that content into there at some point. So we'll have a big update to fix that. And then we want to fix what's currently working as a sort of direct read from DSpace. So it means that people are very clever; they can actually get at the MP3s, and we're fixing that just now to ensure that they can't do that. And then Chris has been working pretty hard on a georeferencing project at the moment using ArchivesSpace data to start building maps. And he's really, I mean, he says he's in the early stages, but he's got this out already. And basically, the larger the dot that you can see there, the more items we have which relate back to that area. So this has been this is the sort of thing that we like to see, and see it all moving on, all good for the site. So how's it going? I don't have any stats, unfortunately, but the site went live in June 2021, so it's been live for a little while now. The second phase of development improved the search. I've got all these things that are coming on, but we had a quote earlier on from the guys themselves who said that they do know they're regularly outstripping their own records for unique visitors compared to the previous iterations of the Tobar and Dualchais site. So we're obviously doing something right in that respect. Okay, so that's pretty much all I've got to say. Just to say that you can find the website at tobaranddualchais.co.uk. You can always contact me and my colleague Pat, who's also on the call, through any of those email addresses if you get any questions about that. And Chris has confirmed that if you've got any Tobar specific questions or anything around what he's doing just now, you can contact Chris there. And Florrie, the project director, is also quite bad. I'm not giving you her direct email address because I haven't actually asked her for it. The other websites that we've got, our main archives space sits archives.collections.ed, and these other three links are the other sites that we have, the interface to ArchivesSpace data that I mentioned earlier on. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. That was fascinating. We have a few minutes for questions, and there was so much going on. I imagine there are questions. I was really excited to hear that Dolly the sheep is represented in ArchivesSpace. So that may be the most exciting thing I've learned today. And it was at the very end, just to drop in the work that's happening in the future related to ArchivesSpace data and mapping. That was really cool. I very much hope and look forward to future presentations from the University of Edinburgh. We do have some questions in the chat. Marcella asked, do you know what tools or platform Chris is using for the georeferencing project?
Right. Oh, yeah, great. You can come on. I was going to say, brilliant.
It'd probably be easiest if I just answered that directly. Hi, I'm Chris Wright. I'm a folklorist and Scots cataloger at Tobar and Dualchais. The georeferencing project, the work I'm doing just now is essentially leading up to having the developer Primate have a stab at it. And I was basically trying to get a handle on what our data looks like to kind of mock up for them what we need it to do. So basically, it's about 100 lines of code in Python. And it just uses, I think, the Plotly library in Python and just overlays 3 data sets, which are all based on subjects. The places are where things were recorded, where they talk about, and the native areas of the people that were recorded. And those are just overlaid and toggleable. So there are about 4,000 places and 3 iterations of those in 2 languages. So it's fairly complex, but the actual code itself is fairly straightforward. How that will be interpreted and then duplicated by the developers, the professionals, to run in a web interface and a search, that's probably quite a different thing. So this is more just something for us to mock up to be able to use in talks and things like that, and to get it straight in our head what we're going to be asking the developers to do down the line.
Thanks, Chris. All right, we have a few questions coming in. I want to acknowledge we are at time, but if you're okay with it, we'll give it 5 more minutes for Q&A. We'll still take our full 10-minute break, and that will work out. So I'm going to read the 3 questions we have in the chat, as long as the team is okay answering the questions and has that 5 minutes, and then we'll go to break. But Megan asks, what was the driving decision to move from DSpace to Archipelago?
Okay, so we've basically had the collections platform at Edinburgh, which we built 10 years ago, with a DSpace backend and the Skylight PHP framework that's sitting on top of it. And I think really DSpace was never really intended, I think, for that purpose, but it was what we had at the time, where we sort of waited around to find somebody that would build a sort of collections based thing that was kind of more around cultural heritage than, and I know there are many dams that do that sort of thing, but we had a digital transformation which we're still going through, and Archipelago sort of came to light as the thing that was ticking all the boxes from our perspective. So we haven't moved yet, but we're very much behind what they're doing, and it's it's an open source thing as well. We were kind of using DSpace for everything, and it was part of the digital preservation workflow that we had at the time. So that was what we were. It was just the default thing to use. I think our Archipelago will allow just slightly more. A bit more detail, a bit of a nicer interface, I think, for that kind of content. I mean, for this, it can really go anywhere. It just needs to be somewhere that the ArchivesSpace can read it. But I think we're moving everything else to Archipelago, so that will go as well.
Thanks, Scott. All right, I'm going to ask one more question, and we'll see where we are with time. Joshua asks, was there any discussion about dual or multi-language just data entry in object records? Oh, I bungled that. But multi-language description in object records.
I'll say a little bit. I mean, I know that we certainly, the requirement that came to us was certainly around agents and subjects. I know that titles have never fallen in that category, and I don't know if Chris can answer more about that, because it may be. I seem to remember that in the rescue site it was never stored dual language, so you wouldn't have had the data. But is there anything you'd like to add to that?
So the full project is bilingual. The old interface that was developed in the early 2000s was actually bilingual as well, depending on preference set by the user. The front end is meant to be as bilingual as possible. In terms of actually cataloging on the in ArchivesSpace, we have summaries in both English and in Gaelic. And those are pulled through by reading the label of the note, literally a summary English, summary Gaelic. That's how the Gaelic skin on the website knows whether to present Gaelic information or the English information. So we do double up where necessary. And for example, with the places as well, every place has an English and a Gaelic form. Even if it's in a non-Gaelic area, there's a duality to absolutely everything in ArchivesSpace that we do for that reason.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Chris. I think this Q&A could go much longer, but we are at time. So I'm going to go ahead and say that we're going to move into our break, but there are still some other questions in the chat. If anyone from the University of Edinburgh team wants to tackle those, that would be wonderful. And I sincerely hope that you come back and keep us apprised of this project. It's really interesting. And there are so many different directions we could go in terms of this conversation. So thank you so much for this presentation. I'm going to go ahead and say we are at break now. We are going to take a 10-minute break, and then we will come back for our final block of sessions for the forum. So we will reconvene at 10 minutes after the hour. Thank you, everyone.